Welcome, everyone. Excited to be able to present to you a great panel today. I'm Michael Pearl from Zedita. I've been at the company for about 2.5 years. I run our embedded and OEM sales and partner with organizations like Emerson, which we have Claudio on today, and bringing in solutions at the edge. So I have a long history of working in IoT, Cisco, Jasper, Exida. This is I think a topic near and dear to me because for most of my career in sales, building solutions with OT, but really IT is part of the process of making sure the security and the compliance and all the pieces that are important are in place. So, this topic is going to be a great one for you all to learn about today. Thanks for attending. So with that, I want to introduce my two panelists today. I have Claudio Fayad from Emerson and Tom Emershek from Verizon. Excited to have them introduce themselves, and then we'll get into some of the topics. Claudio, you want to start first?
Sure. Welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Really excited about this conversation today. My name is Claudio Fayad. I work for Emerson as the Vice President of Technology, responsible for the development of our control system platform called DeltaV. DeltaV, we see it as the precursor to what we call today Edge. Control systems like that will normally have about hundreds, thousands, or even tens of thousands sensors connected to it. And we think about the Edge as bringing compute power and connectivity as close to the process as possible. That's what a control system does. So for us, looking at this topic about IT, OT, and the Edge is a great evolution of the work we do. So we're always excited to talk about that.
Thanks, Claudio. And I'm Tom Emershek. I'm a solutions architect at Verizon. I've been with Verizon for well over a decade now. And in my role as an architect, I focus a lot on edge technologies, applications and infrastructure, as well as private wireless networks. So taking the cellular network that we're familiar with today and bringing that to more of a smaller, almost campus type environment. And that's over 4G and 5G cellular, which is surprising to some people, right? 4G is just everything's so 5G centric these days. And you meet an architect from Verizon, you just assume that he's going to attack every solution or problem with a 5G hammer. But the problem that we're trying to solve is going to dictate the technology that we use. And sometimes that's 4G, 5G and beyond. So it's an interesting space to be. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Well, I'm glad to have you both on this panel today, and we're going to get into it. So I'm going to start with a real basic question. And I'm not sure if all of our audience even understands the difference between IT, OT and the gap there, but tell me what it means to you. And really, maybe you can frame that also. And what does that mean to your customers, that IT, OT gap, and how to overcome that? Claudio, you want to start?
Yeah. So, I mean, we leave that division of that separation for many, many years, working on technology that are initially designed for the OT folks. So we primarily, we think that what we see with our customers and on discussions of our customers, as the technologies become more ubiquitous and is used both on IT and OT, we see that everyone is trying to sit on the same table and have good intentions, but normally they tackle problems in a different way. When we look at security, connectivity, normally OT has an approach to that, while IT has a slightly different one, and everyone is trying to solve it, right? When we look at the topic of this conversation, the IT and OT gap, what we see a lot of times is as people embark on that digital transformation, they're reinventing their process and trying to connect everything from their physical assets all to their ERP systems and all of that. We see all of them trying to do POCs, but normally it either starts on the OT side or it starts on the IT side. And that's when people start realizing and getting overwhelmed because they do those POCs from a siloed perspective almost always. And then they start with a lot of excitement, but they hit a wall. And normally that wall, it's because, well, if I'm looking from an IT perspective, I go this far. If I start on this OT perspective, I go that far, and things don't connect. So a lot of it from our perspective, helping our customers when we look at IT and OT is We understand everyone is trying to solve a similar problem. We understand that they're trying to work together, but they normally start from different perspectives, and it's very hard to break the silos on their own. So that's what we're normally focusing on these conversations is how can we bring it all together and break the silos and create a common bridge, a common connectivity between the two disciplines.
Yeah, great points. How about you, Tom? What do you think?
I agree with all that. And we see a lot of that every day, and that the gap it's real. There's a couple different flavors of the gap, the way I see it in a lot of the customers. I mean, from a security perspective, that logical air gap, I guess, or even sometimes physical, right? It needs to be there. There has to be some type of logical separation just because of the nature of a lot of the work that's being done in those OT environments. So we're not necessarily trying to close that gap, but we are trying to bridge it, which is accurate with the title of today's session. And then from a technology perspective, sometimes it's almost like not necessarily a gap. It's kind of reminiscent of the digital divide, where we have a lot of this great technology over in the IT world, the access to fiber optics, the modern application infrastructure in the cloud, the edge, AI, and we're trying to bring that technology over into the OT. But sometimes it's not as easy as it should be, right? When you're trying to that AI engine is trying to be fed by an ERP that's connected to a collector that's, pulling Modbus controllers, and, it's a multi-drop. It's just connected to sensors. It gets complicated, right? And they talk about flattening that, and that's important, but it's simplifying that architecture and getting it to a point where the response is tight, right? You're getting down into leveraging, if you have everything on the site, let's get those responses down into the milliseconds, the single digit milliseconds, so that we could really realize this industry 4.0 dream of being able to take actionable, have a list of actions that we could take on the OT, because we're actually leveraging that data in real time or near real time.
Awesome. Thank you. I think, kind of playing off some of what's been talked about, a lot of it is silo. So I'm going to go into our next question is these industrial focused, especially industrial focused organizations. They're often very constricted by these silos and segmentation, or constantly looking for ways to modernize and digitize and bring their operations up to what's, I guess, looked at as industry standard, or at least where the industry's going. So how do you think the solutions like edge computing? So take edge computing as an example, which is unique, it's different, it's new. How do you think that is a solution that would bring together IT and OT, and what aspects of it would you say are important? Tom, you want to start on this one?
Sure. When you bring the edge to any environment, the IT, OT, or any customer, I guess you're bringing the cloud in tow with it. It's where everything runs today. So, and even if you have an in-house development team, right? If they're developing applications in-house and not necessarily using the cloud, chances are their last position that they had at another company, it was very cloud-centric, right? And they're used to using cloud-based tools. Oops, I had something pop up here. Excuse me a minute. Used to using cloud-based tools for development and delivery of applications. And the same with if you don't have an in-house team, if you're using an SI, right, to do a lot of this, they live in the cloud. All their solutions very cloud native in the way they deliver them. So you're bringing that today's technology to the floor just by extending that cloud. When we say the edge, we're extending the edge of that modern day cloud to that environment, and then you get results from that, right? You get an improved latency budget, an improved bandwidth budget by processing at the edge. You're keeping data in-house, right? So you're not necessarily streaming all your data back up to the cloud. You can do inference at the edge. You can have the raw data there, but then filter that data through and only send the necessary data up to maybe some type of a cloud platform, which would then reduce costs if you're on some type of bandwidth consumption line back up to the cloud. So you end up making everybody happy, right? You've got the finance folks happy, the application folks, security folks. It just brings all those silos together and completes the solution.
Thank you.
I like the thought there, Tom. The edge is about making everyone happy. So I'll probably steal that at some point. But I think as we looked into that, and Michael, you mentioned something. I mean, when you look historically, especially from the OT perspective, segmentation was the solution, was the way to make all the complexes more tangible and allowed us to look at things. We use segmentation, for example, through the Purdue model to address security. We use segmentation, we call this horizontal silos, from the perspective you have control and it's one domain expertise, and you have reliability, a different domain expertise, and then you have labs and so on. So even on the OT side, there was a lot of segmentation. That was how we could actually provide focus, accountability, domain expertise, and above everything else, security. But with that comes an issue, especially now when we have more of a data-driven approach, is that it got very expensive, very complex to share the data, and even more complex to share the data in a way people can easily contextualize that. So we talked today about data democratization, which I think is an interesting way of putting it, because it's actually more than just making data available. It's making data with the right information, with the right context available. Because if you only make data available, only people with the domain expertise can actually manipulate and use the data. So to make it so a data scientist can actually compare data and combine data, you have to make the data available and the context available at the same time. And I think that's where the modern edge comes in place. It's a set of technologies and architectures that actually allow us to go across those silos, allows us to break those silos, bring things together, and more important, bring the data together, contextualize at the right level. Like Tom said, we can't send it all to the cloud and create this magical data lake that everyone is going to be able to benefit from. We keep hearing the words of a data swamp. We start trying to build a data lake, and we build a data swamp that, okay, all the data is there, but now it's so complex that no one can do anything with that. So the edge helps you to contextualize, classify, get the data available at the right place to the right people with the data context. Going back, making everyone happy, because now they can actually use that data and simplify the networking, simplify connectivity by actually removing all the segmentations that we talked. We have created this vision about the boundless automation. And part of that is saying, well, the Purdue model, which is very well known in OT, is a segmentation, tiers of network, served us well until now, but also created those silos. So now it's time to probably retire some aspects of the Purdue model and actually have a more lean, streamlined connectivity where you can make everyone capable of connecting, analyzing the data without actually touching the critical pieces of the control system, because that's actually what you have to keep protected at all costs.
Yeah, if I can just add to that, Claudia, I mean, this huge data lake of information, it just had me thinking. There was maybe 5-6 years ago, we put out a report, we being Verizon, where it was mostly focused on, they may have been calling it even M2M then, or IoT, but at a survey that they did, we were doing a great job as an industry of collecting information, right? Everybody's connecting devices, we're gathering it. But from the survey, they determined that I think it was only 8% of companies are using more than 25% of the data they collect. And that stat it's been years, that stat just stuck with me for so long. It was just amazing to hear. And I don't know what the update to that is, but it's just classic, right? We go through the exercise, we're doing the right things and getting that data, but when are we going to start putting that data into action, which just complements the point that you're making.
And that's one of the common walls people hit when they do their POCs. They start with providing some connectivity, dumping the data there, and then the next phase is to get benefits out of that data. And that's where a lot of it dies, because they realize, well, yeah, the data is here, but we can't do much with that. So yeah.
So a couple of common themes. Cloud, you got to be able to store your data somewhere. You typically are going to use edge to make better decisions, but ultimately you need to get that data somewhere to use it, longer term. The other piece that it really is about is data itself, and I think that leads to my next question. So in thinking about data, it kind of comes to a topic that I think is probably one of the most paramount between the IT OT gap, which is security. And so, I really want to talk about that specifically. And I think in your experiences, how do IT and OT think about solution security? And then, maybe think about how you would talk to an end customer. How would you talk to them about that? How would you help to guide that conversation when you have IT and OT in the room? Because that's, there's safety and security. There's kind of go together a little bit, but security itself, it can take on a life of its own in a discussion, right? And I go through it regularly, right? I'm sure we did with you, Claudio, when we started talking about everything secure at the edge, right? So I'd love to get your feedback and thoughts on those pieces of security puzzle with IT/OT.
So, I can put a few comments here. So when we think about this OT and IT and connecting automation systems, which maybe 7 years ago was, oh, no, we were never going to connect them, right? But today, the benefits of connecting that as getting the data and optimizing multiple assets at the same time outweighs the benefit of leaving it there. So it goes down to security being the showstopper or the make or break. If they don't feel comfortable with the security around the solution, it's not going to move forward. Now, as you're trying to figure that out, OT and IT have different perspectives. We can talk about patching, right? From an IT perspective, you want to patch things as soon as possible. And hopefully you're going to patch them at 2 a.m. where no one is using Word or Outlook. You talk about an OT person about patching their systems at 2 a.m. in the morning, they'll just go crazy at you, right? There's no chance someone's going to remotely patch a system at 2 a.m. in the morning without someone seeing what's going on. So it has to be a much more intentional and planned process than that automated processing there. So there's all kinds of difference that we can point out, but fundamentally you have to bring them on the table now and understand. Everyone is trying to do the right thing, but they start from different perspectives. Say, okay, we do want to monitor the nodes, for example. On IT, every node, every switch is monitored. All those logins go into a server on a SIEM solution or something like that. When you're doing so of course it makes sense to do it on a control system as well. Well, but the network is different. It's very controlled. Do we need the same kind of things? Can we have one gateway that is kind of collecting that data and then making it available instead of you touching every node and creating a potential issue on every node? And normally, once you start talking about that and understand both parties and adjusting the solution, you can have a good solution out of that. Now, the most important thing we see on the evolution of cybersecurity, and I think the data is being a big part of that, is in OT, we always thought about securing the perimeter. Once you secure the perimeter with a firewall, you can trust everything within that perimeter, which is already a concept that IT said, well, that's not good enough. We have to look at every node. And now that is also coming into OT. So now we start talking about that in two perspectives. One, every software we write, every code is written by a developer with a secure code development mindset. And it's not enough to secure the perimeter. The code needs to be written in a secure way. It needs to be containerized and isolate on their own sandbox so they don't, if it get ever contaminated or infected, it doesn't actually spread throughout the system. And we have to monitor what's happening between those workloads to make sure that it's not going away from that predicted behavior. So if a workload is supposed to talk with another workload, tries to talk with something else, you have to flag and monitor that. And that's the essence of the zero trust architecture. So you do not inherently trust anything. You actually understand what you're supposed to do. You monitor that and you flag any unusual. So that's an example of IT mindset coming down to the OT, where we just have to make sure it happens in a way that it doesn't impact the real-time, deterministic, low latency behavior of the OT systems.
All right. Great answer. Tom, I think you probably have a little different perspective from, your your role at Verizon and kind of conversations you have that might be a little different than what Emerson's having with their customers. But I'd love to hear from you, the security side and what kind of conversations you would be having on the wireless side.
It's slightly different, but a lot of the same. And it's amazing how the conversation has changed over the years, because there was a time a few years back, I was charged with socializing a hosted PKI, which is basically a platform for digital certificates. And I thought, wow, this is going to be like shooting fish in a barrel. This is going to be so easy. I mean, it's how do you don't have to sell security, it sells itself. And I would talk with device OEMs and partners, and they're like, yeah, customers aren't really asking for it. It's not on our roadmap. And I'm like, what is going on here? And then today that conversation would be just totally different over the course of 5 or 6 years, even. It's great. And for me, the security conversation, it's not something that you pitch to a customer. It's something that the customers aren't asking for. It's just something you just go, it's part of the conversation, right? It's approached right away because they want to know. And something that people neglect as far as a private wireless network is just the SIM card itself from a security perspective. And people look at it as, it's kind of it's small, tiny. Sometimes they're a pain to insert in the device, but that SIM card is it's like an ID card. It's like a CAC in a military installation. It's that second form of ID, because unless you go into, let's say, from a commercial or environment, the public space, if you go into a Verizon store, you need a SIM that's been pre-programmed to join the Verizon network. So you can join the greater Verizon network. And in the same way, if you have a smaller version of our macro network, right? If you installed a private wireless network in the OT, the only devices that are going to join that private wireless network are ones that you've handed a SIM card to that's been specifically programmed to do that. Those SIM cards are powerful. They've got their own processor, their own operating system. They've got their own storage. It's a bit of a rudimentary file system, but the credentials for joining that network are there. And then depending on who's in the room during these conversations, you can talk about the use of certificates as a device is joining a network. You could have a conversation about licensed spectrum versus unlicensed spectrum, and even CBRS spectrum. If you start looking into this kind of push towards cellular networks and private wireless networks in any environment, including the OT, CBRS has been a big catalyst to help that move. So hats off to the FCC for making that spectrum available. And then even the containerized solutions that Claudio discussed earlier, the 3GPP did an excellent job of bringing that next generation application architecture to private wireless networks, because the standalone 5G packet core is fully containerized. So it's great. Everything's running in its own service. There's access levels that are secured with digital certs to access into those. It's almost like concentric rings of trust into each one of these different services. So there's security just all around in a private wireless solution, as it should be.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. It kind of reminded me, because I was talking to somebody at our reception last night. He brought up LoRaWAN. He's like, you know what LoRaWAN is? Like, I sure do. It's kind of funny because, not everybody understands all the different crazy protocols that are out there to connect things. And I think that, again, lead into the next question. So we kind of jumped a little bit on connectivity. And I think, one of my biggest challenges in talking to any company about the edge solutions, whether I'm selling solutions to them or helping them to understand how they would take it to their customers, is that whole connectivity piece. Edge, to us, it's important to connect to the cloud, but not all the time are you going to connect. It's sometimes in environments where you don't have connectivity. You don't have it often. It's unpredictable. It's expensive. So it becomes one of those top subjects. How like in those conversations. So now you're talking about whether it's private connectivity or private 5G, kind of like you talked about, Tom, or some other private network, or potentially air gapped. And these conversations now come up. So it's kind of like, well, we have to connect something. We have to connect sometimes. We have to do this. We have to be able to orchestrate. So how do we do it all? So when you have those conversations with the customer, and IT and OT are in the room, and maybe some are saying, well, we don't allow any connectivity, and some are like, well, we have to be able to connect. What happens? Like, how do you take that conversation to the next level? So Claudio, I'm sure you experience this often, with your customers, but what do you think?
Yeah, no, I think, I think it's a common theme, like Tom was saying, the conversations are changing, right? And um, where 10 years ago, if you talk about connecting things to the cloud or outside their own private environment was a no-go, now people are seeing more and more, right? Control systems, automation systems in general, they were designed to optimize a plant, a physical plant, a physical unit. But now they're also seen as generating the data so people can optimize their whole fleet of assets. And you cannot do that unless you start connecting things. So I think the conversation is changing. And but there's still people that are very concerned about that. And as the conversation changes, there is this hope that technologies like 5G, Wi-Fi, or Ethernet are going to magically make everything else disappear, and it's going to be the one-size-fits-all solution. But then when the conversation hits reality, well, people realize, yeah, they're going to help, but there are all kinds of environments out there. Low power environments, environments that are connected all the time, environments that are capturing data offline and connecting once a day, environments that are connecting once a month, environments that someone has to go there and manually retrieve the data and connect. So it's that realization that you're going to have to think about all the different technologies that we need and combine them into OT technology. And that's another benefit of the edge, right? It's bringing all the complexity, all the multiple protocols and technologies that we're going to need, and actually creating a uniform connectivity to the IT systems and to the cloud systems out there. So a lot of our conversations, they go around that.
Yeah,
Great.
agreed on the connectivity piece, and a lot of that starts with it. There are a lot of connectivity options, and it comes back to the problems that you're trying to solve, right? Which connectivity option is best for what you're trying to accomplish? I mentioned about LTE prior. Sometimes it's 5G. You mentioned LoRaWAN, Wi-Fi 6. There's options. There's no one size fits all connectivity that's just going to slay everything else, right? That's going to be what you need, and it's going to depend on not only the problems that you're solving, but the devices that you're trying to connect, right? You may have a vision for the technology that you want to use, but the path to get there for a large majority of the devices on your floor may not make that possible. So, I mean, as far as a public and private connectivity, I mean, from a Verizon perspective, right, that's where we help out a lot, right? I'm fortunate to have all these different options from a cellular perspective. We could start with public connectivity, which is usually what I would do first, right? If it meets the customer's requirements, help them understand the benefits of all the technologies, where one shines more than another. But start with something that's at least easy to adopt, right? Easy to work with, even if it's just an interim solution. And public connectivity is straight there. And then discuss maybe if you have difficulties, maybe it's geography, maybe it's the nature of the construction where access to that public network isn't as readily available. Then we can look at an in-building solution where we kind of extend, not necessarily a repeater, but actually put an antenna system in the building that would then connect back to that same macro cloud. And then if you wanted to take that a step further, where you get into some of those security discussions that we talked about earlier, where you want to host your own private core, we could look at that option as well. So we're fortunate to have a lot of different ways to make the OT in any environment really work from a cellular perspective.
All right. And I'll just remind the audience, I'm happy to take any additional questions. I know I have at least one more that I'm going to ask. I haven't seen any pop up yet, but if you do have any out in the audience, please add those into the Q&A window. I'm thinking back to some of the challenges that I've had when I have to, be in the room with IT and OT and try to figure out, how do I bridge the gap? How do I bridge the gap in my conversations? And one of the things that I did early on was, work with somebody here at Zedita, and we put together an actual slide that talked about the importance of what IT cares about, what OT cares about, and then how that comes to the middle, right? Whether it's safety, security, compliance, the solution, the technology, the use cases, right? How do you bring it all together, right? And so my question to you both is, in thinking about that, what's the biggest challenge that you have to overcome in those discussions? You know, what does it lie for each of you, which would probably be a little different. And then maybe some use case or you know, an example of a discovery meeting or something you had where you kind of got that stiff arm of, well, wait, you know, we can't do that. And then overcame that, right? You have one team that's saying, yeah, we need this. The other team saying, you can't do it, right? How'd you overcome it? So that's my part A, part B. Tom, you want to start?
Oh boy. Yeah, I can do that. So that problem that I'm hearing isn't exclusive to my meetings, and you've had those as well. So that's good to know.
Not just you. No.
Yeah, it's difficult. It's sometimes you feel, sometimes it's a great environment, and a lot of that's going to depend on the corporate culture. I've been in meetings where you have different departments, including IT and OT, where it's very obvious after the first 5 or 10 minutes that these folks just don't get along. It's going to be a difficult conversation, and part of you wants to almost try to play therapist, and part of you wants to just get through the solution and the technology, and you have to do a little bit of both. It's show them how both their concerns can be resolved with the same solution, or maybe it's a combination of solutions. But it's very important to listen with both ears in those types of situations to make sure that you're addressing all the problems in the room, because you're right. Sometimes there are, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but just different agendas that we're trying to reach. So it's important to be attentive to both. And a lot of times for me, it comes down to not necessarily pushback and I don't want to do it. It's a little more of a pushback and a lack of understanding. And especially with private wireless networks, it's a new concept to a lot of folks. I mean, they understand cellular technology. Most everybody has a phone, possibly a tablet, other devices that are connected. So we have some familiarity with the way it works. But when you really start breaking it down into installing a system at a location, and you're looking at antennas and radios and a baseband unit and a core and services, and it's just some of those concepts that they've never had to deal with before. All of a sudden, wow, I thought I was pretty up to speed on technology. I don't even know what some of these acronyms are. I'm checking this stuff out. So there's an education process that has to happen, which we're more than happy to do. Right. And we're Verizon. We love talking about cellular networks and things like that. So we're always happy to talk about that. Spectrum options, even. You can spend a day talking through licensed spectrum versus something like CBRS, which I mentioned earlier. So the education for me has been the key, and just helping them understand where we're coming from. And a lot of times that leads to more of an opening during that discovery of the real problems that we're trying to get at.
Yeah, it's funny that you had the therapist comment, because it triggered me on I was talking to a manufacturer and we were going pretty deep, right? And the IT side brought us in. We were recommended by Gartner. You should look at these guys. And they were kind of our friends. The OT guys were like, pushing back all the time. I think once it came to pricing discussions, they all seemed to come together. All of a sudden, everybody was like, okay, well, that's fine, but what's your price? And it, you get these stories and these analogies because you are trying to figure out how do you bring them two together? Because one side's like, yeah, this will work. And they're trying to pitch it and they're trying to look like they found it. And the other side's like, well, we can build this ourselves. And, you get into these battles, but, I've been through it many, many times. Claudio, what about you? What do you think? What's your experiences?
I think it's similar, and something you said there makes a lot of sense. I think, like just Tom, we sometimes sit on the table where it's very collaborative and everyone is trying to figure that out. Sometimes it's both IT and OT together grilling us, right? Because they're trying to figure out where we go. Sometimes we're there to help each other come to an agreement. But sometimes it's also that, like we said, they have different agendas, they have different perspectives. What you said right now, the IT folks bring their trust advisor, which is an IT company, and the OT folks bring their trust advisor, which is an OT, and both have their own solutions for that. And if you start competing with each other, that's where I think everything goes wrong, right? So I'm a bit advocate of, I think we also, as suppliers and partners, we have to look at the OT suppliers, the IT suppliers, and instead of just promoting our own solutions and letting the customers figure it out, we can also help them to actually figure it out on our side as well. So when you can actually partner between the IT suppliers and the OT suppliers that have one that position as a trusted advisor and combine a good solution together, I think you can actually build and bridge that gap in a much more efficient way. But we've been in all kinds of different solutions. In the end of the day, you have to listen, you have to understand they're coming from different perspectives, and you have, by either educating or understanding or showing how the workloads, the software, the connection is different, how real-time, low latency is different than high availability and high latency on the other side. And then at some point you earn that the right to be providing and promoting a solution, become the trusted advisor, and that's where you know you're creating value together.
Yep.
Right on.
Right on. Yeah, we've all experienced the challenges, and I think the good point is when you have a solution that does bring people together, in the end, it's a win-win. But it can be painful to get there, and once you do, you feel a lot better about it, and then you learn from that, and you go to the next one, right? And you kind of build your battle card. But I just want to thank you both for being here today and, being panelists. This was a great discussion. I really enjoyed it. I hope our audience did as well. So Tom, Claudio, thank you so much. Thank you to the audience for attending. Just really quick, we'll have a break, just a little bit over 5 minutes. At 11:30 Pacific time, we have Kelsey Hightower, Distinguished Engineer at Google Cloud, delivering a midday keynote. So, another exciting session and a keynote to follow. And you can use the link in your agenda to get to the next session. And I want you to enjoy the event and the rest of your day. And thank you all for attending. Appreciate it. Bye, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you
Great
both.
to be here.
Thank you, everybody.